In tonight's news edition, Jordanians vote nationwide to elect a new parliament in legislative elections that will boost the kingdom's reforms. Election day in the kingdom is generally peaceful, with minor incidents recorded but no injuries. And foreign observers say the elections are quiet, with procedures that meet international standards. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King and French President François Hollande discussed on the telephone developments in the Middle East and ways of enhancing Jordanian-French ties. Ballot boxes closed nationwide about 2 hours ago, after which voting in the kingdom's legislative elections was extended for 1 hour. The final turnout in all districts across the country was over 56%. Vote counting began immediately after polling ended. Independent Elections Commission President Abdelilah Al-Khatib said 1,287,000 people have voted. He said the vote went smoothly and counting is underway. Jordanians have voted to elect a new lower house, culminating the kingdom's reforms and the move to democracy and pluralism. Voting was slow in the first hours, especially in the capital, as the main Islamist party had boycotted the polls. However, it picked up later in the day in most areas. Farah Ajlouni reports.
Jordanians were voting nationwide in landmark elections seen as a defining moment in the kingdom's reform drive. From Aqaba in the south to Ramtha in the north, voters in urban and rural areas and refugee camps were choosing their representative in the country's 17th parliament. Dozens of voters queued outside polling centers in cities and towns countrywide as polls opened at 7 a.m., receiving male and female voters who will decide the makeup of the next legislature. Polling got off to a slow start in bright sunshine and clear skies in the capital Amman, but picked up in late afternoon hours, although with a low turnout. By early evening hours, turnout was higher, particularly in rural tribal areas outside the capital, with over 50% recorded in Balqa, west of Amman. Strong turnout was also reported in Mafra, northern and southern Badia Desert region, and the southern governorate of Ma'an. The elderly and disabled were present at the ballot box. This man in the governorate of Madaba, south of Amman, had left his hospital bed to cast his vote. Tens of thousands of security officers had been deployed to guard polling stations. Public Security Department Chief General Hussein al-Majali said security bodies carried out their job to secure the elections through a phased plan. Majali reported dozens of incidents nationwide, including shootings, vandalism, and rallies, calling for boycott. No injuries were reported. The government has promised free and fair polls and predicted a good turnout despite a boycott by the Muslim Brotherhood. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour has vowed the election will be free of intervention by government agencies and security bodies. Independent Election Commission President Abdelilah Al-Khatib said voting went on according to plan.
The figures are accurate, real, and correct, and projected as soon as voters cast ballots. The procedure is to ensure that citizens are the core of the electoral process. There is nothing to hide. For the IEC, everything is clear for citizens, media, and observers.
بصورة واضحة وبصورة منفتحة تماما أمام أعين المواطن.
For the voter, the economy and commodity prices are first and foremost. The election took place in the kingdom amid economic gloom, with austerity measures adopted to cut an unprecedented budget deficit. People are more concerned about the economy than politics. Candidates' integrity and a crackdown on corruption and abuse of power were also on voters' mind and key public demands.
For the first time, we feel there is a real sense of transparency and integrity on this day. Thank God. My message to all citizens is to choose the best for the sake of the country and its citizens. We call for the youth, the educated, and our relatives to vote without the influence of political money.
For the first time, the vote is entirely administered and supervised by the Independent Elections Commission, which was formed for this task and was conducted according to a permanent election law, which together were key reforms achievements passed by the previous legislature. Farah Ajlouni for the news at 10.
More than 1,400 candidates were running in the polls, the first held under a new electoral law. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour said all stakeholders, the candidates, voters, media and civil society institutions had the collective responsibility of a fair election. Although the polls were not perfect, he said the government and Independent Elections Commission had done their part and stood up to malpractice, referring violators to court. Hebatoum takes a look at key election facts.
Jordan's first parliamentary elections since the Arab Spring will bring a new parliament and usher in the kingdom's first parliamentary government. Around 2.3 million eligible voters have registered to elect the 150-strong House. For the first time ever, voters cast two ballots, one for the local district and the other for the closed proportional list at the national level. The elections took place under the supervision of the newly formed Independent Elections Commission. The Commission handled all stages of the electoral process, starting with registration and ending up with final results. Voters selected their representatives out of 606 candidates competing at the local district level and 819 who ran under 61 national tickets. The elections law designates 27 seats for the national district and 15 for the women's quota. The appearance of women was noted in the contest of the elections, where the number of the women candidates reached 105 for the local district and 86 others for the closed proportional list. A total of 7,013 local observers monitored the polls, while 9 international missions and 13 bodies deployed 493 observers. Hebatoum, News at 10.
Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour said he had not yet tendered his resignation to His Majesty the King and would do so after the parliamentary elections. Mansour told reporters that an election boycott is not the path to democracy, but voting is an obligation. He said voter apathy was because people had no faith in previous elections and parliaments, but stressed the kingdom can be a role model in the Arab world in terms of free and fair elections and a strong parliament and government. Lu'ay Balqar reports.
As polling opened throughout the kingdom, Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour was among the first to cast his ballot at an elementary school in his Balqa governorate. Noting the reforms Jordan had made over the past 2 years, Mansour stressed today's elections as a key step along that path.
This is a step forward. It's not the end of reform. The parliamentary elections are the climax of reform and the landmark. Had we achieved something this time, it's because the state had delivered on its pledge to hold fair elections. The 70th parliament will be remembered for the fact that these elections are different from those my generation witnessed. This is the pledge we made and delivered on. I mean that was achieved by the Jordanian state, His Majesty the King at the helm, the leader and driving force behind reform. The King, who was not thrust into it, but who made clear that the status quo cannot be maintained. The King, who spearheaded legislative, administrative, electoral and constitutional reform. The next phase should be different. The next parliament should be different, and the next government should be different. We have to change.
The Prime Minister said His Majesty the King has spearheaded the reform effort to bring about the aspired for change at various levels. He later told a press conference his government was keen to hold a transparent and fair election, praising efforts by various authorities to ensure a successful election.
This is the harvest time. It's the moment to reap this clean and blessed fruit. Thank God these elections were fair. There's no doubt in the mind of anyone in this blessed country that the government and its agencies had stood with this voter or that candidate, or deliberately targeted this or that candidate. Thank God, all the state civil and security agencies had stood with absolute neutrality. You have no doubts whatsoever that the government had its own candidates, never other than the independent commission that was mandated by the Constitution and the law to hold the elections, and it delivered.
The Prime Minister held Jordan radio and television for highlighting encouraging citizens to participate in the elections. Touring the state-run television's facilities, Mansour was briefed by Director General Ramadan Rawajde on his plans to provide up-to-date and live coverage of the elections. He told Jordan Television this year's elections will be different from previous polls and will be fair and transparent, stressing that the government and its all agencies will be fully neutral. The Prime Minister also hailed Jordan news agency Petra as a local source of election news and its role to project the kingdom's image in the region and the world. He told Petra staff that democracy and fair elections will ensure that continuity of states, noting that Jordan took pride to be among Arab countries holding parliamentary elections. Loeb Al-Ghar for the news at 10.
The elections were held under the scrutiny of local and foreign observers. More than 7,000 monitors from local, Arab and international organizations have been stationed at polling centers across the kingdom. Head of the European Union Monitoring Mission, David Martin, said only minor glitches had occurred that did not mar the course of voting. Martin, who heads an 80-strong observer team, told Jordan Television's Nahil Burhan that measures taken by the Independent Elections Commission meet international criteria.
Well, it's very early in the day, but we've had the first reports from our staff in the field. We've had people out in the field since 6:30 this morning, and it looks like most polling stations opened on time, that the system is working reasonably well. We've had some polling stations who were delayed in opening, had some polling stations with IT problems, but nothing significant. People are campaigning around the polling stations still, and some people are leaving candidate literature by polling booths and so on, and that is against the electoral law, but there's no sign that that's systematic or organised. It's a bit haphazard, but it needs to be stopped. General assessment would be a very efficient start, but a slow turnout of voters, but anticipated a much bigger turnout towards the afternoon. The polling staff.
Head of the Amman 4th constituency, Ali Madi, referred to security a number of complaints over political money in the district of Qwesmeh. He also told a press conference that turnout began to rise in late afternoon hours from the early morning, and said he expected more votes to show up at the ballot box later in the day. Up to 128,000 registered voters were chosen from 19 candidates, including one woman contesting the district's 3 seats. More than 47,000 police and gendarmerie personnel have been patrolling polling stations across the kingdom since dawn yesterday to ensure a safe and orderly election. A further 10,000 were on standby for emergency situations. The Public Security Department said security forces were to secure voters' access to polling centers and vote unhindered. They were also present to help and protect election observers and members of the media and direct traffic outside voting centers. Security bodies had put in place a security plan, deploying officers at more than 1,500 voting centers. Senate President Taha al-Masri said Jordan firmly believed and sought to maintain and develop its constitutional institutions. He said it's high time for a fair election, which has really been so, thanks to authorities who have put in place all measures necessary for the vote's soundness and integrity.
In a polling center, one can see how relaxed and transparent the atmosphere is. For years, His Majesty the King has promised that we will take these measures. This stage will be momentous with a reform-oriented parliament. This is clear today. I hope tomorrow we will start a new phase in sound democratic advancement based on the real concepts of reform and true representation, transparency and integrity. A key task of the next parliament is to review the elections law as it sees fit.
20,000 Syrian refugees, most of them children, women and old people, crossed into Jordan in the past 3 days. The Jordanian armed forces said border guard units received the refugees and provided them with aid before moving them to the Zaatri refugee camp. More than 300,000 Syrians have crossed to the kingdom to flee the 22-month-old conflict. Finally, a look at the weather. Cold tonight with 5 Celsius degrees in Amman and southeasterly moderate winds. Temperatures will rise slightly tomorrow, but it will remain chilly in hilly areas and mild in the rest of the country. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a cool night and mild day tomorrow with northerly moderate to brisk winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. Jordanians vote nationwide to elect a new parliament in legislative elections that will boost the kingdom's reforms. Election day in the kingdom is generally peaceful with minor incidents recorded but no injuries. Foreign observers say the elections are quiet with procedures that meet international standards. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.